Washington Post, ABC News poll out. Stephen Roberts, ABC News political analyst. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, pal.
So Donald Trump's base still as backing him. They're backing him to the hilt.
It's true, up to a point, McGraw. In this poll, 91% of the people who voted for Trump say they would do so again and that they like him. And about 69% of those still support him strongly. But if you look at this poll from another point of view, it's clear that he is a minority president who has actually losing support, not gaining it. Overall national ranking, 37%. And he is the only president since the beginning of polling who has been in negative territory at this point in his presidency, 37% positive and 59% negative. That's a gap of 22 points. The only other president who was in negative territory was Gerald Ford, of course, who was never even elected and had pardoned Richard Nixon. So, and in a number of groups, his support is dwindling, not gaining. As you say, among his core supporters, it remains pretty strong. But you look at, for instance, independents, his support has dropped 13 points. Working-class white women, 18 points. Conservatives, his support has dropped from 81 to 63, 18 points. So the fact is that at this point in his presidency, Donald Trump is losing support, not gaining it. And that's been reflected in his legislative record, which has been pretty dismal because he basically is a minority president who has not assembled a governing majority in this country.
Well, Stephen Roberts, you're right. But it seems like he doesn't want a governing majority. He doesn't want to be over 50% because everything he does and everything he tweets and everything he espouses, he is only playing to that base. He isn't reaching out to anybody else for anything.
Well, I think that's a fair observation. And this is more true in his tweets and his impromptu remarks than in the measured statements that his aides sometimes give him. And if he sticks to the teleprompter, he can be more reasonable. But when the true Trump erupts in his Twitter storms, you're right. He's just appealing to that base. And we said this so many times, that he doesn't seem to understand the difference between campaigning and governing. That in campaigning, you can assemble a voting lead by mobilizing and energizing a minority of the voters because you get turnout that sweeps away the other side. That was absolutely critical. New book out by Donna Brazil talking about the Democrats. She was, briefly chairman of the Democratic Party, and she talks about how tepid the Hillary Clinton voters were and how lack of passion they had. And whatever else was true, Trump was able to generate passion. And in the election, that worked. But governing is very different.
Yeah.
Where you have to assemble a majority, you have to put pieces together. And he certainly hasn't learned that, and that's why his legislative record is so dismal.
But even at this 37% approval, the lowest of any president after 9 months and all the bad, right? Republicans are very hesitant to be critical of him. So he still has enough power to where he is holding his Republicans at bay because they're afraid to go after him. And when they do, they get the Jeff Flake treatment.
Well, that's a fair observation, too. Of course, there have been noteworthy exceptions. Senator Flake, Senator Corker, Senator McCain all have been highly critical, former President George Bush. Republicans are restrained from going after Trump for two reasons, even though Senator Corker says an awful lot of them share his negative views privately and won't say them publicly. One is a fear of being challenged in primaries by more conservative candidates. That clearly is a real political fear. The other is that no matter what they might think of Trump personally, and again, we've talked about this many times, in the end, every Republican legislator has a common interest with Donald Trump. They have a common interest in passing legislation, in writing a record of accomplishment, of being able to go to the voters and say, look, we've done something. Another ABC poll out this morning in a generic ballot says 51% of Americans would pick a Democrat in the next election, the congressional elections next year, and only 40% would pick a Republican. Now, the numbers are much closer if you talk about likely voters. But you look at those numbers and you're a Republican and say, no matter what we think about Trump personally, he's the one with the pen who can sign legislation. He's the one who gives us that extra degree of leverage and power. And so no matter how reluctant we are, no matter what we think in private, we're forced to go along with them. Now, of course, there are some Republicans, particularly unelected commentators, who say this is a deal with the devil. This is that these Republicans are losing their soul by not saying publicly what they believe privately. But that hasn't happened in large numbers yet.
Wait and see what happens. Stephen Roberts, have a good week. Thanks for the insight.
Okay.